All right, y'all. It looks like we're live. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode of Portland Cocktail Week Distance Learning. I am your host today, Janae Williams. I am the social media manager / strategist for Lush Life Productions, and today I am joined by Laura Lashley and Kelsey Ramage, who I am very excited to talk to today about some NA cocktails. I can't wait. But I'm gonna shut up and let you ladies introduce yourselves really quick. Laura, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm super excited to be here today as well. I'm Laura. I am the U.S. Education Manager for Seedlip, and I think some of you saw the masterclass we did a couple of weeks ago. So this is a follow-up, and I'm going to hand over most of the talking on this one to Kelsey because she's our cocktail expert and wonderful bartender to talk to us about how she approaches like really thoughtful, interesting, but simple non-alc cocktails and how you can do that with your bar program. So Kelsey, over to you.
Hi. Thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be talking about this. For anyone who doesn't know who I am, my name is Kelsey Ramage. I started Trash Tiki about 4 years ago now with my partner Ian Griffiths. Opened a cocktail bar this past in 2019, now shut, thank you COVID, called Supernova Ballroom. And now I am doing to-go cocktails called Dolly Trolley Drinks for the next foreseeable future. And this is one of my favorite categories to talk about because I think it opens our eyes to a whole like array of ingredients that we're starting to work with, not only in regular alcoholic cocktails, but also in non-alcoholic cocktails. So there's a lot of like movement and innovation happening in this category. So I'm really excited to be launching into it and sharing kind of like what I've seen over the last few years and what I'm seeing in the future of non-alcoholic drinks.
Yeah, well, thank you, ladies, for joining us today. I'm very excited for this class. And just to continue what we talked about on Instagram a few minutes ago, when I would get, NA cocktail asks at the bar, it was, like I said, limited to juice and soda. It would be basically, some type of lemonade, which I think is unfair because that's something that I would give to a child, And I feel like as an adult, who probably craves different flavors or more complex flavor profile, as you'll talk about later, it's they are owed that, and we if there's going to be kind of like a shift in culture to where it becomes more acceptable, we need to make it as acceptable as possible. So that's all I got to say. I'm gonna let you take it over, Miss Ramage.
Okay, cool. We've got I've got a little slideshow for y'all, but I'm just going to do a little intro into what we are talking about. So basically what we're going to be going over is a little bit of the history of non-alcoholic drinks, kind of the steps that have happened in the last like 8 to 10 years as to the start of where we had non-alcoholic cocktails, like Janae explained, kind of like the Italian sodas and sort of the citrus and syrup situations that were happening mostly for children. And then this kind of like next step that sort of happened as things started being fermented, and we really sort of saw bartenders kind of breaking this habit and turning to different ingredients to create bluesis cocktails. So we're going to go over sort of what those ingredients are, how they came to be, and then how we're learning how to use them. Because I think that like in any situation when you have especially newer bartenders that are sort of presented with a whole bunch of different possible to use ingredients, the default is to get really excited and want to put them all in one glass. And that's kind of like what I want to teach you guys how to step away from. So we really want to see, we're going to go over the characteristics of each one of these non-alcoholic ingredients, how they're meant to be used, what their acidity levels are, and then really look at local produce and herbs in how to do support those flavors, and really you can get an incredibly complex cocktail out of 3 to 4 ingredients. It's really not more complicated than that. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So we can launch right into it. We'll go into the next slide. So I always like doing this with my presentations, just so you guys have an idea, and also keeps my timelines. We've got about an hour. So it kind of keeps me in check, kind of gives you guys an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So there is actually a bit of a rich history in non-alcoholic drinks. I think that it gets talked about a little bit, but there were some game changers that happened over the last 8 years. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then, like I said before, we're going to talk about specific modifiers that have come out of the last 8 years that we've really seen a rise in, and then what their acidity levels, what their characteristics are, and then also how to use them, how to treat them. Because I think that we can't be taking away the traditional base spec and just replacing it with some of these ingredients. They're a lot more nuanced than that, and a lot of them have a lot of huge depth of flavor that we need to be aware of. Then we're going to go over a little bit of intention and attention in the way that you're looking at non-alcoholic ingredients and flavor, and just making sure that we are paying attention to things that might have alcohol in them, but we'll go over that in depth. And then we'll pull all of those together. We're going to make a little drink at the end of this, and kind of leave you with some notes. And hopefully you are inspired to go make some of these drinks at home, or in your to-go cocktail programs, as it were, right now. So let's launch into it. Right. So could we make this one a little bit bigger so everyone could see? I'll go back to being small. The traditional spec, when we're talking about basically what we've been taught as bartenders, and when we go into the history of cocktails, usually what you'll see is the base spirit, a modifier, a citrus, or a syrup, depending on if you're doing a stirred or a fresh, and then an optional lengthener like soda or bitters. So when we think about this, and we've gone into the Jerry Thomas, we've done all of our drinks history, we've really encapsulated this is how we make drinks, and apply that to non-alcoholic drinks. All of a sudden you're missing sometimes your modifier, your 1.5 ounces spirit, and then your bitters. So you're kind of left with the citrus syrup, which is Janae mentioned earlier. It's really it's a huge problem, because we're really just creating the same model of drink, and things like that. They're great to have behind the bar, and these are things that if you're walking into a bar that hasn't been set up with the ingredients to make non-alcoholic cocktails, generally what you have at your disposal is an array of probably quite a few beautiful different syrups, all of your different citrus, but really, and then soda. And that's really kind of it when you're tasked with someone coming up to the bar and ordering a non-alcoholic cocktail from you. You're kind of at the limit of the tools that you have. So when you remove the spirit, not only do you have not much to work with, you also lose a level of viscosity and complexity. If you think of things like gin or rum or any one of these base spirits, there's a lot of time, care, and attention put into making sure that they have, beautiful vanilla notes or juniper coming through. The level of alcohol within them as well creates viscosity viscosity without sweetness. So the thing that's making the drink thick and have a mouthfeel, we're taking that away. And then with things that are barrel aged, we're also taking away some of the length. Bitters are usually the tannin element that creates that, once you've taken the drink and swallowed it, that length of flavor that lingers on your palate. That's kind of all being removed. So you're kind of left with a drink that's oftentimes just, if we're talking about syrup, soda, and citrus, it's quite short. It's not going to be as viscous. The only level of viscosity that you have left here is coming from sugar. So oftentimes they can be too sweet. I just realized I swore in this thing. They're like, we have fresh juices behind the bar, but really we're limited to what? Lemon, lime, and grapefruit. We don't oftentimes have like things like apple or celery or carrot, or like, we're not Whole Foods. Usually we're just kind of limited to a few different juices behind the bar. And then you've got like very basic lengtheners like tonic or soda. So you're really left with this like very, very short set of ingredients or set of tools to use. I will say that, however, in the last few years, just having toured around and seeing some bars like creating and putting time and effort into their non-alcoholic drink programs, we've seen problems. We've seen this like rise in things like non-alcoholic amaros, which are super cool. I've tasted some delicious ones. People are starting to reach for things like kefir and kombucha, and we're going to go through a little bit as to why that might have happened. And then we're really sort of seeing them lob all these things together in cocktail form, which I like to compare this to, a very new bartender. If you think back to your first time doing like a mystery box competition, and you open the box and you've got like a bottle of Fernet and sherry, and then maybe like a syrup and, like maybe a little apple in there. Your first instinct is to get really excited about these things. And like, it's great. We're making some really big movements as to, how these ingredients have come to be. But the instinct for us to like throw them all into one might be a little bit step too far. So we really want to look at how to use them, which ones we can use lots of as lengtheners, and which ones we need to like dial back, make sure that the flavor is there, and then really take the next step when we're making drinks. So that's kind of like the problem. If we could flip to the next slide, I will show you guys sort of where this all began. So a lot of you have probably seen these before. I think these were like some of the first like bottled non-alcoholic drinking things. I'm just going to call them drinking things that I really saw that weren't like a bottle of soda or a bottle of like, ginger beer or something like that. And I distinctly remember the day that I first saw these things. These are from Pok Pok in Portland. Actually, that's really funny. I never noticed that I was doing Portland Cocktail Week and we're talking about a Portland product. Very cool. Good on me. So I was managing this bar in Vancouver. The chef had gone down to Portland and brought these bottles back, and they're drinking vinegars. And for my head, I was like, okay, great. The chef's like bringing something back, and I'm going to have to figure out how to use this thing in the bar. And what the hell is this? And then I tried it, and I was like, okay, there's like definitely a level of acidity here. I don't know if I could drink the whole bottle, but it was something that I started to think about, and definitely like it sort of created this, like a lot of bars, and especially restaurant bars, which is what I was looking at, were creating non-alcoholic cocktail programs as an afterthought. Whereas Pok Pok was really one of the first that stopped making it an afterthought and actually put these, not only these, but a lot of their non-alcoholic drinks on the top of their menu rather than as kind of the end. I know that Somm has since rebranded. These are kind of the old version of the bottle. Initially, when they launched, they were very much touted as like a health and wellness thing, and they've since moved away from that. They want it to be more of like a modifier, or like a just a drink to have that's quite complex and interesting. But I think what happened here was we really saw a rise in fermentable things. And I'm going to talk more about fermentable things later on in the chat. But this rise of drinking vinegar, which if you leave a kombucha on for too long, it's essentially the same thing. You're gonna wind up when you're creating a vinegar, you do get that little SCOBY on the top, similar to a kombucha SCOBY. So they're like very, very similar. And what you get is this really lovely, like acetic quality, which is quite unexpected. And I think that we need to have just a little bit of respect for how that acetic quality can be interpreted on our palate. But I'll talk about that later. So this is kind of like the start of the coolness. If we could flip to the next slide. Right. And then we're going to see, since then, I mean, this is probably in the last like 2 years. I'm fast forwarding a couple of years here because we saw this like rise in Pok Pok. And then we saw, you know, a little bit more of like kombuchas, these like flavored sodas that came out. Like, obviously, we all drink LaCroix. And things that were like without any sugar in them. So it really started expanding from there. And I think that there's a reason I put these two things right at the top. So your dry July, your dry January, sober October, dry November, like there's all of these reasons that to like take a month off drinking. And I think for us as bartenders, like it definitely helps. I definitely do 1 or 2 of them a year. It helps with my energy levels. It helps me feel better. It helps me start working out again and thinking about what I'm eating. It just is like, I think these are really, really good things for our industry. But the other part of what these have done is normalized and created this new culture of being okay to not drink within our bars and within our spaces. And I think this is a really good point that's been happening in the last like 2 years. Because when you put a section of non-alcoholic drinks on your menu that has time, care, and attention, you know, it's not on the back part of the menu where, you know, the person not drinking has to literally flip the menu over. So you're making them already feel uncomfortable. They're being, you know, sometimes they're interspersed with other drinks on the menu. Sometimes they have a little section that's either at the top or on the side. That level of creating normalcy really creates space and comfortability for people not only just taking a month off, but people who've made that decision in their entire lives to just stop drinking alcoholic drinks. So that's been a really big reason for this movement. Another part of this that I'm just gonna kind of go around. I am an aging millennial, so I I imbibe sometimes. But there was like a really big article. I can't remember the publication that made one of them. I feel like it was Forbes that stated that millennial drinkers as a whole are drinking a lot less, and they're drinking a lot more low ABV things, more wine, more beer. So I think that us as bartenders and as influencers in the way that people drink really need to pay attention to that. And we've seen even a rise in low ABV drinks. So that's kind of just something important to note, important to keep our eyes on as well.
Kelsey, I'd like to stop you for a second because that's
Sure.
one thing that kind of caught my eye. And it's not really a question. It's just something that I want to emphasize is that you just put on there decrease in spirit forward drinkers and because their palates are not developed for it. That's pretty significant, especially to me, because, you know, not everybody that walks into a bar knows how to drink, right? And I think that'd be a very good way to like introduce people to flavors. So that's I feel like that's cutting edge right there. And I'm glad you brought that up, but please continue.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I think it is a really important thing. Like they might not be used to that like harsh esters on a spirit when you're first drinking it. So we need to just make sure that we're taking care and attention. Like there's a difference between, you know, syrup and citrus, and then the other end of the spectrum, which is just spirit. We need to kind of meet that somewhere in the middle and just take the time, care, and attention that it takes to create complexity in those types of drinks. Legalization, obviously, I am not very good if I have smoked any kind of weed and then I have a cocktail. Like it's not fun, not a good situation. So I think with legalization, we really, there's been like a rise, not only in like CBD and THC sodas, but also like especially up here in Canada, where it kind of got legalized, all at once. We really saw that that people were like having some weed like on the sidewalk or in the park, and then really just not wanting to have a bottle of wine after that, and looking for other alternatives. I'm going to do the multi-use spaces and kind of lack of PM offer hours and offering. I don't know if y'all have ever done like a couple of months off or like taken some time off drinking, but there is a social aspect that I think that gets lost a lot of the times when we've chosen to take that road. And I find that like the first week or the first week and a half, I generally avoid bars, not only for a temptation, but I don't know where to go in terms of like, I want to meet up with friends. I want to have a little bit of a chill, and there's just really nowhere to go that I feel comfortable and have that space. So, I think that like I mentioned before, making sure that we have we're creating spaces, that we're creating not just space for people that aren't drinking in our bars, but just making sure that we're taking steps to make these people feel comfortable. And then the last one, and that's pretty obvious, there's been a huge movement in mental health, physical health awareness, and that's definitely contributing to this, and that's definitely what I'm going to talk about and touch on in just a second here. And then the last one is just quality over quantity. Yeah, I think people are definitely coming in, and I definitely noticed this as I was working in bars here in Toronto. People are coming in for 1-2 drinks as opposed to sitting there for a 4-hour session. So we really need to make sure that those 1 or 2 drinks are like bomb, right? We can flip over to the next one. All right. So Alex Curtena, obviously one of the leading people in the industry, said this was like 2 years ago as well. He said non-alcoholic is the new vegetarian. And I thought of this as I was reading this article that came out the beginning of January that was like, more people have gone vegan for January than any other year. I'm not sure where they're getting that statistic, but I went back from eating. I've kind of been a yo-yo vegetarian for the last like 8 years of my life, but I went back vegetarian in January, and I don't think that that's any kind of coincidence. And as we see like more and more months popping up over the calendar year that people are taking a step back from alcohol as well, we're just going to see this movement, gaining traction. And I do want to mention, like, when Seedlip came out, it was launched in Selfridges in London, and I think I was in London at the time. It became the highest selling spirit in all of Selfridges for the first year that it was on the shelves. Like, if you think about that, that's especially for London, where everyone's buying a bottle of gin and tonic. It was like people just switched over to Seedlip and tonic. Like, that is absolutely incredible when you think about like starting a movement. And it just like it not only did it taste good, it's something you didn't have to think about. You could just do a Seedlip and tonic instead of having a cocktail. It made people stop thinking about having a drink at the end of the day. It kind of shifted the movement from just choosing having to take 1 month or a few years off drinking, to being like, oh no, I can just do this as I can have a cocktail and then have a Seedlip and tonic, and it just became mixed in as part of the vernacular, and really I think made us go on like one train and to just like turn and be like, this is kind of going to be the new normal. I hate saying that now that we're in COVID times, but like, that was a cool new normal. Okay. We can flip to the next slide. This is another thing. I know that like some of y'all might have seen this. There was a number of ones that were happening in the UK when I was there. I think they really started rising in popularity like 2015, 2016. But Daybreaker was this like early morning festival that you were meant to go to before work. Now, I'm not like, I'm kind of a morning person. I'm not like a 4 or 5 a.m. morning person, but like, this is what people were doing. You'd get up, you'd like put on your glitter or your like or your like mask and your makeup and like get all ready at like 4 a.m. You'd go dance your butt off, and then you would go to work afterwards. And the whole thing was like, sometimes they like incorporated a level of yoga or meditation, but there were like hundreds of thousands of people flocking to these things at like 4 or 5 in the morning, which is like incredible. But their biggest thing was that they were absolutely spirit free. There was no alcohol served. Spirit of mind. So really what we would see was that they were starting to serve things like sugar-free sodas and kombuchas and things that were really being marketed for the health and wellness community, and they were being consumed en masse. So you really saw that like this is where the non-alcoholic kind of like alternatives, something to drink while you're partying and you're having fun, really started to gain momentum in more of like a festival sphere. And Janae, you hit this on the head when we were chatting on Instagram just before this, was that, you know, where do we see this movement going if it's going to continue to have traction? And I think that it was a really important thing that you said, was that if we're going to create this culture of normalcy around not imbibing, we're going to see it in festivals that do serve alcohol, and I think that that's really important for the health of festival goers as well. You know, I've definitely been in that situation where, you know, it's like noon on a Saturday and I'm going to see Fantagram and I just don't want to have an alcoholic drink yet. And we need to have more options than just like water or soda. And I really do think that we are going to start seeing that when things start opening up. And it's a really important part of where our industry is going.
Yes, totally agree. And feel free to pop in questions if you have any.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that.
I'll interject really quickly and say too that I was a daybreaker skeptic because I am not a morning person at all. And the thought of like getting up at 4 a.m. and going to like a rave seemed totally insane to me. But the energy and like Seedlip sponsored a few of them in kind of the early days in the US when they were doing them over here. And it's incredible how like good the vibes are and how excited people are to just kind of like be in the space. And I think we've seen a lot in my experience that the places where there's something else going on, like music or entertainment, if you work at a venue that has entertainment for some reason, like people are coming for reasons other than just alcohol. So you want to provide them with that drink in their hand and that experience so that they can have, you know, the social element of what they're really looking for, which is, you know, maybe a festival, maybe a concert, whatever. So sometimes the like most sort of unsuspecting places are where non-alc drinks are really appreciated the most, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely a lot of times when music is involved, like people just want to come and like enjoy the music, and there shouldn't be this like almost culture around just having to have a cocktail with that, or like an alcoholic cocktail rather. And a really good example of that is Listen Bar in NYC. Thank you, Laura. So if anyone has not heard of this bar, it was doing it as a pop-up for a little while, but basically you go and it is run by people who are ex-music biz or still in the music biz, and the whole point is like really delicious non-alcoholic beverages and some bomb ass music to go alongside. So I think that these guys are really leading the charge in terms of where non-alcoholic movement is going. They're super cool. I have not unfortunately had the chance to go check them out, but if you do see a pop-up when things start easing off, please do go check them out, because I think that they're this is like pretty innovative. We can pop to the next slide. Okay, let's dive into it. So that's kind of your past, present, future. We're gonna go deeply into, how am I doing for time? Oh, good. Perfect. Because I think this is like the stuff that I spend the most time on. So let's launch into it. Sweet. So whey. This could be a very polarizing ingredient. It does still contain lactose, so there is definitely a something just to flag as a possible allergen there. But when I think of whey and how to use it, it does create this creaminess on a palate. So like if you're used to say fat washing anything, or like creating milk clarified drinks, which really can I've never seen a milk punch that is non-alcoholic as yet, but this is a really good ingredient to reach for should you ever want to create like a milk punch style drink that is non-alcoholic, because essentially it's clarified already. Don't get me started on milk punches. I think sometimes people do it because it's cool without thinking about the flavors that it strips out. But with this, you kind of are creating that, like you're taking out all of the fat solids, so that like heaviness that can kind of, especially in non-alcoholic drinks, that heaviness that can kind of flatten the flavors of your syrups or the flavors of your modifier, or even with like if you're putting it with Seedlip. Taking away the fat solids will really allow these sort of your herbs and your fruits and your Seedlip to really like shine and take the spotlight. And it also adds a little bit of a level of a lactic acidity. So you're going to, if you're going to use this, you might want to dial back your lemon juice, which is also a good thing because this is a byproduct. You want to use less lemon juice anyways, because we use too much of it in our drinks, I think. It's also really simple to do. You can usually just, if you're like, well, how do I buy whey? Where do I get it? I do know that there's a couple of cheese makers and yogurt makers based in New York City that actually sell the whey in Whole Foods. But if you can't find it on the shelves, it's super simple to do. So basically what you're going to do is just, you could just get some whole milk or some like a little higher fat percentage milk, bring it to like a low simmer. And then all you're going to do once it's like got a little bubble on, starting to foam a little bit, you're just going to drop in like an ounce of citrus. And what that's going to do is like split the milk right away. It also doesn't take like a clarified milk punch. It doesn't take a day or an hour. It takes 20 minutes, y'all. So like it'll start to split. It'll start to like start looking real weird. Just start like, you can also do it with citric acid if you don't want a lemon flavor. You don't want that cooked kind of citrus thing happening. Citric acid does it really, really easily. You're just going to give that a little stir. It'll start to separate. And then what you're going to do is just strain it back through cheesecloth. And what you're going to get at the end is the stuff that's sitting on the cheesecloth there, those fat solids, that is actually a ricotta. So you can eat that. It's delicious. You usually just put it with crackers, a little salt and pepper, but you can kind of do what you want with it. From there, you can serve it as a bar snack. I usually just eat it. And then you're left with this really wonderful whey product, and you don't lose a ton of volume when you split this out either. I think for like 2 liters of milk, you'll probably get 1.5 liters of whey, so you're not like losing a ton of it either, which is always good for our bottom line, right? So whey, super easy to use, adds a little acidity. The only thing you're going to want to be careful about is that it does kind of smell a little bit. Thanks, Sarah. It does kind of smell a little bit weird. So you might want to just like add it. It's the same thing as like using egg white in cocktails. It smells a little bit weird. You're just going to want to finish it with like a little bit of a spritz of something, like express a lemon over the top. And really what you'll have is like a super simple, like amazing ingredient to work with. We can flip to the next one. Fermentables. I love these things. If anyone has ever heard me talk about fermentation, I talk about it quite a lot. And I think the biggest thing, having talked about Pok Pok already and their Somm drinking vinegars, I think that they really led the charge in health and wellness. And all of a sudden we saw this like explosion of like a whole bunch of kombuchas on the market. So a note on kombucha. For this class, I have made my own. Laura found this really wonderful booch pop that if you guys have a kit that you'll find in there. There are such a vast array of kombuchas on the market, and there is such a wealth of information on how to make them yourself. I'll probably be writing an article on that now that I'm talking about it and posting it on trashcheekysucks.com. So stay tuned. But the thing is, I'm just going to explain the different types and kind of give you guys like a working field knowledge of it if I'm going to do it in like a 2-minute caption here. So basically, if you can buy kombuchas in sort of 2 different styles. One of them is the one that I like using the most. It contains the mother still. Depending on your use, it might be naturally carbonated or it might be force carbonated. Both are good. It just kind of depends on if you want more fizz in your drink or if you don't. You will find that like naturally carbonated ones will have small little bubbles, kind of like when you're drinking a nice champagne. Whereas the force carbonated ones are going to be like more like a Topo Chico style. So you're going to have like big bubbles, really splashy. So they're really good for like highball style drinks, like the one we're about to make. Also with kombuchas, they can, so like I said earlier, basically it's like any kind of fermentation. You're going to put sugar in it, you're going to allow it to ferment, and then you're going to take off the SCOBY and refrigerate or arrest the fermentation. There are different levels of sugar content that you can leave. It's the same thing as like using natural sugar or like having residual sugar in like a Riesling. There's a lot of wine comparisons with this. So basically what you can have is you can even over ferment it so that it's got a lot of acidic quality so that it becomes almost like a vinegar. So depending on what you really want, the vinegar style ones are going to be, I use them sort of to bump up my lemon, or to create like another level of acidity and complexity in the end cocktail. You can also like over extract the tea. You can use black tea, you can use green tea, you can use like, a whole bunch of different herbs. It like really becomes this like thing that you can have a lot of different experiments with. You can also you can pull off your fermentation, add a little bit of juice, and then seal it up, the juice and sugar, and seal it up. And that's how you're going to get your secondary fermentation, much like a champagne, little bubbles again. And then you're also going to have a little bit of a flavor component that you can, that will ferment a little bit. So you can, if you're adding something like grapefruit juice in, you'll have this like really lovely, like, slightly grapefruity sort of fermenty beverage at the end of it. So fermentables are quite cool. You can also mess with things like tepaches and wine ferments. The only thing that you have to watch with that is that they will create a natural little bit of alcohol. So you're going to want to either have a way of measuring that at the end or just a way of cooking it off.
Kelsey, we had a question come through.
Cool.
So someone asked how much citric acid to add. I think they were talking in reference to the milk punch.
I would say if you're doing like 2 liters, you probably do like a gram. Like it's really not very much. You can also like, chef, sprinkle the salt on that shit until it like starts splitting. And then if you haven't, if it doesn't split for you, you're just going to want to keep it simmering and like sprinkle a little bit more. It's not like you're not going to mess anything up. The worst thing that's going to happen is that you get these really hard kernels of cheese and then your ricotta is not going to be as nice. The whey is going to come out the same.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Easy. Yeah. So the other thing you can do is ferment fruit. It's really fun to do. I like doing it a lot. Usually what you do is like, you'll add fruit, sugar, and then a little bit of like, something to get it started. Like same way you do a kombucha, you do a SCOBY, you could do like brewer's yeast, wine yeast. The only thing is that at the end of like a 3 to 5 day ferment, you are going to have a small, like between 0.5 and 2% alcohol in that. So you really want to make sure that you are either measuring that you're cooking it off, that you know exactly how much alcohol is in that, because you don't want to be putting something that you think is non-alcoholic or think is non-alcoholic that actually has alcohol in your non-alcoholic drinks. That's very, very important. You could hurt somebody. Okay, next. Verjus is super cool. I love this stuff. I always have like a couple of bottles of it in the bar, especially since we're doing to-go drinks now. It's a really nice lengthener. It usually has a smaller amount of this really wonderful mix of acids as sort of like a flavor profile. So if you think of like lemon or lime juice as having mostly citric and malic with a little bit of lactic in the end. This is like a byproduct of the wine industry. So it's going to have like this wonderful palette of like citric, malic, like lactic, a little bit of a bit of an acetic quality as well. So usually these are labeled with their Brix content as well. So you'll have an idea of just how sweet they are. I think the one that I use right now is 12 Brix. I've seen ones as low as 8. They also have a little bit of a viscosity happening. So it was really, really nice to have this like little bit of a lengthener. The only thing is like, I don't usually use this in like 2-ounce portions because it does have that sort of winey flavor, but it's mostly an acidifier. So I reach for my Verjus and maybe bump it through with a little bit of lemon or lime juice, or like match it up with grapefruit, just to like reduce the amount of citrus that I'm putting in a drink, and then just to add that like little level of complexity if you don't want to have just like a syrup and a citrus in your final drink. The Verjus is like amazing, especially if you can find one that's produced locally. If you've got any, like especially in Portland, y'all have some amazing like. I know that you guys are all over the United States right now, but if you have any sort of local winemaker, usually you can get Verjus straight from them. I know I get mine from Featherstone up here in Canada. We can go to the next slide. Of course, I'm going to talk about non-alcoholic distillates. Seedlip was first to market. Obviously, they are super cool. They've got 3 different expressions, but I've kind of noticed and seen that there's a couple other ones that are popping through. Cedar and 3 Spirit. I have not had the opportunity to check out just yet, but there's more, and it's just giving us some more tools to put in the chest, right? These are all things that I've spoken about. I usually I have at my home. I had at Supernova, but they're not super common to find in the bar. Whereas these things are being caught or being found on back bars a lot more. So it just has a little bit more, and it's something super easy. Like it's not anything that you have to make. You can just buy it off the shelf and like put it on your back bar, and all of a sudden your bartenders have like a bunch more tools at their disposal when they're asked for non-alcoholic drinks. So these are really like, you need to have them. It's kind of becoming like the vermouth, right? We can go to the next slide. Okay. This is where I start usually with making like non-alcoholic drinks. There are so many delicious teas, especially there's a couple of local importers here in Toronto. You can really, when you're making teas and infusions and looking for roots and herbs and stuff, I'm going to touch on local produce in a second. This is kind of like the base of, once I've figured out what fruit I'm going to highlight, I usually pick a tea or like a herb that will really accent that. And that's what I've done with the cocktail that we'll go through in a second. But you have such an easy way of like creating bitterness, because we no longer are able to infuse, use bitters because they contain alcohol. And that's something that I really want to make sure that you guys aren't doing, is putting bitters in your non-alcoholic drinks, because often they have like up to 45% alcohol. Teas, all you have to do is leave the leaves in there for a little bit longer, and you all of a sudden got this wonderful bittering agent that you can use like a tincture, or like you would bitters, and it just really kind of accents whatever else you've got in the drink. So this is kind of like one of the main components that I have in any kind of non-alcoholic cocktails that I'm making. We can flip to the next one. I love this little guy. I put it in a bunch of my presentations. But alternative sugar types. So these are a really good way of adding complexity, especially when we're talking about creating a sweetener. And I think that's something that we have to be really aware of when we're talking about non-alcoholic drinks is their viscosity. You never want something that's like super watery. You want to have that mouthfeel happening all the time. And honey is a really good way of doing this. Don't be like reaching for castor sugar all the time. There's a host of so many different other sugars. Xylitol or stevia are some sweeteners. You got to be careful with those because they can make something like super cloyingly sweet without adding any viscosity. So I usually like reaching for something that's a little bit like thick and syrupy, like a honey. I usually try and stay away from agave just because I think honey's a little bit more local for a lot more people, especially in North America. And it also adds another like layer of flavor and interest, especially you can get like wildflower honey. You can get like all kinds of different like interesting, super cool honeys that have like a completely different flavor profile than like an agave syrup or just making a simple syrup.
Kelsey, we had another question. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
We had a question. The question is, what's the shelf life of house-made verjus?
I have never actually made house-made verjus. I usually just buy it from a supplier. I imagine that you could probably make verjus, but I generally just buy it from the shelves, and then it's like a wine. As long as you keep it closed, it's probably good for a very long time. Once you open it, it's kind of the same thing as vermouth. You're going to want to use it within like, I don't know, 2 weeks to a month.
Can I actually jump in and ask on that note, because this is something that I get asked a lot. Shelf life is obviously something with non-alc that comes up as a kind of question mark sometimes, even with products that are store bought. How have you found is the best way to run a bar program that's profitable while dealing with shelf life, non-alc sort of batching and issues around that? Do you have any like words of wisdom or special tricks?
Definitely, especially when I learned a lot when we opened Supernova, and like we really went to using local produce and really having to figure out, because like the growing season of most things here, like it's not just a matter of it going off. By the time the thing goes off, the season's over and you're not going to be able to get it tasting good again. I think the peach season last year was like 3 weeks long.
Wow.
Yeah, it was insane. So what I started doing, I turned to like doing long infusions, macerations, or like those would have been alcoholic or fermenting stuff. So usually what I do is like our peach wine, for example, I'd get it kicked off. And then if I wanted to use that as a non-alcoholic ingredient, what we do is just actually use a refractometer, measure it. Did I just use the wrong tool name? Having a brain fart. Anyway, measure the alcohol content. And then we'd either like heat boil it off so that gets reduced back down to 0 and it becomes something that you can just keep in the bar and use. Obviously it does still have a shelf life, but as long as the fermentation is arrested and that you've pasteurized it, you're pretty much you're good to go for at least like 2 to 3 weeks, which does help a little bit. But really, honestly, reaching for stuff that has been bottled and pasteurized already, it really, really helps with like bottom line and stuff going off for sure. Get someone else to figure it out. Buy it packaged. Just kidding.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. We can jump to okay, so these guys are like, they're really cool. Their name, this photo is taken from Forbes Wild Foods up here in Toronto. Basically what they have done is created this business model around, they'll get like indigenous foragers that make their living off of and have this vast, incredible depth of knowledge as to what grows here in Canada, what can and can't be eaten, and how it should be dried. And they usually have a whole whack of ingredients that I have no idea what they are. So I love going in there, and like it's usually like a little bit of a learning experience. A lot of times they have like these forage actually grown roots, herbs, and nuts, and seaweeds and mushrooms and stuff like that. That's all just been dried. And so I can usually go up there. It's like a learning experience. They've got things like wintergreen and like Labrador tea and like, candy cap mushrooms and all of this stuff that I was like, wait, I can make drinks with this? Like, what is this? And usually what I'll do is take it home and make a tea with it. I can usually get the flavor, I usually get, information as to, does it need to be toasted? Is it safe? Blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff off of the supplier. And then kind of make a tea with it and see how the flavor works. And then from there, you can like start making non-alcoholic amaros with this stuff. You can like infuse it into your syrups. You can really start and that like opens up this whole new closet full of ingredients that you can start using in your cocktails. So if you have something, if you're lucky enough to have something like Forbes around, or you can find, local foragers that are willing to share their information and their love. Usually they have a really big love of locally grown ingredients with you and are open and willing to share. This is like a cool thing that I do all the time. And I think this is like the number one guy that I go to when I'm looking for inspiration or just like a new flavor profile. So this is just like such a cool learning experience for me. We can flip to the next one because this goes right into a farm that is right outside of Toronto as well. So these guys are, I think they're called Hillside Farms. They're all organic. There is like a lot of organic produce and interesting things being grown outside of Toronto. I will say that there is definitely like this weird kind of lock where it's not necessarily, I know that these things are being grown. Cranberries, for example, I was trying to find cranberries at like the end of September one year when I know that like there's some around. I was able to find a number of farms and there was no route to market. I could not get cranberries, even though there's like 3 cranberry farms up in around Toronto. I had to, one of our bartenders literally got in her car one day and like went out, drove to this farm like 2 hours away, picked up 5 kilos of cranberries and brought them back in. So there is a couple distributors now. One of them is called 100 Kilometer Farms or 100 Kilometer Foods. Obviously, the concept is in the name, but they're really helping bartenders and restaurants alike really connect with the produce that's being grown locally. Because I think that as soon as you start doing a little bit of research, you really see this like huge wave of like what is actually able to be grown and produced in your region. And I've just learned so much working and doing a little bit of research around the stuff that grows here, and it's like completely eye-opening. So that's usually like when I'm starting to build a drink, I usually go to what is available locally in terms of produce, and then I'll look at like supporting it with a herb or a spice, especially up here in winter when things are not as readily available, and usually most of it is like dried. This is kind of like a really nice way to bring everything together. So we can flip to the next slide. And now we're going to talk about how I brought it all together. So in this drink, basically what I wanted to do, this is kind of like my thought process around it. I really wanted to use mandarin, and not only because mandarins are pretty like they're available. I know that they're not local up here right now, but they are. They're right around Christmas time. We see like tons and tons of mandarins, and I know that they were in season in California and up and down the West Coast where it's a little bit hotter. So basically, we took the mandarin rind because mandarins are delicious and I can't help but eating them. So I just took the rind, we soaked it in some really simple sugar, made little mandarin Oreo. So you get those like really wonderful like aromas that come off of mandarin. And then I reached for something that was like a dried thing that I know was being produced in the summer when the thing was in season, and it's just a little bit of celery seeds. So I find that this really plays off of the Seedlip. So when I was looking at which Seedlip do I pair these couple of different things with, Grove seemed like the most obvious choice. It's also really, I know the pictures with garden as well. You can pair it with either one. One of them will pick up sort of the green notes in the celery, and the other one will pick up the sort of mandarin citrusy notes in the Grove. So we're just going to go ahead, and if you guys have a kit, go in with 30 mils of that guy. We're just going to build this in a highball. And basically the point of this drink was to really highlight like how simple it is to make complex non-alcoholic drinks. So the syrup, super simple, but it's got like that herbaceous thing happening. It's got a little bit of like the citrusy notes happening, this like really lovely aromatic. We're going in with, sorry, I was doing this in mils. Haha. This is a ounce. We're going to go in with 15 mils or half an ounce of the syrup. I'm going to bump that through with a little bit of lemon juice, just like half an ounce again. And then with your kombucha, you guys have a little booch pop. This stuff is super fizzy. It's going to be perfect in a highball, and it's going to bring out the like black tea. There's a little bit of green tea in there. I've made one that's kind of similar. I've used a genmaicha tea, which has a little bit of toasted rice in there. So you guys can go ahead and depending on your glass, you can add between 2 ounces and 3 ounces right in there. And then we're just going to top that up with a little bit of ice. And what the kombucha is going to do, and this is why I really love using kombucha in non-alcoholic drinks, is that it just, it adds this like kind of fermenty flavor. And the tea adds this like bitterness and level of complexity. So all of these like different things that you've got within 1, 2, 3, 4 ingredients are really just going to come together, and you're really going to get this like, you're going to get depth, you're going to get citrus, you're going to get like a little bit of bitterness coming through. And then you can go ahead, and I've got a little bamboo straw, and just garnish that with a couple of little dehydrated lime wheels. So there you go. Cool. We can flip to the next while you guys are sipping on that. We can flip to the next slide, and I'm gonna touch on a couple of things before we jump off, just to make sure that we aren't hurting anybody, and also just some care and attention stuff. If we can. Right. So this is a really good example of kombucha that actually contains alcohol. Kombucha is a fermented product. We have to be careful when we're choosing which kombuchas. There's a lot of them that have pasteurized that out. But some of them, if you've got like the same SCOBY and you've been adding sugar for like, 6 months like mine, it probably has a little bit of alcohol in it. So just make sure, again, either cooking it off, you're starting with a fresh SCOBY, making sure that you can measure it if you're making it at home. But also if you're buying it from a store-bought producer, that it doesn't actually contain alcohol. Yeah, something that's pretty important that I think a lot of people overlook. We can flip to the next slide. All right. So my dad doesn't drink. I have a number of friends who don't drink. I have a couple of vegan friends as well. And when they tried the Impossible Burger, the Beyond Meat Burger, they were like, yo, this is gross. I really like it but like, I think that like meaty flavor, that like, that kind of coat your mouth thing for vegans, sometimes it can be quite off-putting. And I want to make sure that like sometimes if we're making like say a non-alcoholic Negroni, or we're creating Nomaros that kind of are modeled after actual alcoholic products, we can be creating triggers for people. So really just in your communication, in the way that things are put on the menu, by all means, they're cool, do them, go after it. But just make sure that you are communicating that these things might be triggering and may taste like alcohol. They're okay. Just make sure you're telling people about it. Bye, Laura. Okay, we can flip to the next slide. So pulling it all together, I'm just gonna like briefly touch on like how all of these things that I've talked about, because I think I've talked about quite a lot of stuff, and leave you with some like finishing notes here. So we can flip to the next slide. I don't like the word mocktail. I think we can like remove it. And I touched on this at the beginning of the presentation. If you look at that lovely cocktail picture, the non-alcoholic is like way down at the bottom. I'd also I want to stop putting it on the back of the menu. It's the same thing about creating space for people and creating like that care and attention of how somebody's going to feel when they're looking at a non-alcoholic part of the menu. Is that if the only thing that is on the back of your menu is the non-alcoholic cocktails, like you really need to make sure that people are feeling comfortable and they feel like part of the space. So putting it as an afterthought or as something, on the back where they have to physically, move something over to even look at the cocktails, it's just a little bit of a thing to keep in mind, be mindful of. And also like, I don't like the word mocktails. I think non-alcoholic cocktails is just a much better way of saying it. There was a bar up here in Toronto that called it placebo cocktails. And then they made sure that, because it can be a little bit confusing, that they said 0 and low ABV, or 0% ABV. So just making sure that like your communication is really clear as to what those things are, but just making sure that they are, they're smartly placed on the menu. There we go. We can flip to the next one. All right, so these are my final sort of notes for y'all. Anytime that I'm starting with a non-alcoholic drink or trying to create, and this is not just for non-alcoholic drinks, this is for any kind of drinks. We're not looking to like just slap something together. Make sure that you're taking the same time, care, and attention to complexity, flavor, length, all of that stuff into your non-alcs, just like you would any other drink. And then a note on palate that I really like. That's why I like going for like an herbaceous note or a tea infusion or a little bit of fruit. Is just make sure that it has a beginning, middle, and an end, that it tells a story, that it really highlights the flavors of the ingredients that you're putting in there. And then finish it off all with a sense of pride. Make sure that you're placing it on the menu, interesting, in a smart and well thought out way, that you're naming them something cool and fun, that you're talking about them with people, make sure that you're not only just putting them on your menu, but giving them space, giving them time, purpose, and attention. And that energy will really feed into the space in your bar, in your staff, and in your peers. There we go. Hopefully you guys got a little bit out of this.
I sure did. I don't know about everybody else, but I got like a whole page of notes here.
Oh, that's awesome.
So thank you, Kelsey. That was so informative. I learned a lot. I have a lot of things that I need to research, a lot of things that I have to play with. So you've definitely made a student of, the non-alcoholic cocktails and me. I do want to mention, if anybody has any more questions, please drop them in. But before we go, I did want to, touch on something I said in the last class with Laura. I definitely agree on the whole 86, the mocktail, because I don't believe that, the term spirit should be, only defined by, alcoholic spirits, because I feel like a cocktail has spirit in it in general. I feel like for me, the definition of spirit is kind of like a flavor profile. The spirit of the cocktail is brought out by whatever is put in there. So
Mhm.
I can definitely see that as something, kind of like a turnaround that definitely can become a thing. And I think it is. So I have a question for you. So as someone who I've never led my own bar program. So if I were to try to implement, a non-alcoholic cocktail menu or non-alcoholic cocktails on our current menu at any bar, I would have to go through superiors. So do you have any recommendations for people who might be wanting to add, non-alcoholic cocktails to their menu, but need to go through a bar manager or, owners or anything like that?
Definitely. And I love answering this question because it's money.
That's a good one.
Like it's just, if you're taking out like one of the most expensive aspects. And I do find as well with Seedlip and some of the non-alcoholic distillates that are just on the back bar, like we want to make sure that not only do we have them, but we're using them. And I also find that, like, especially with Seedlip, you don't need a full 2 ounces to really bring forward the flavor in the cocktail. So yes, they're like a little bit more expensive than like other non-alcoholic ingredients, but we really we only used an ounce in this one. So we really don't need to be using like 2 ounces of the stuff in our drinks. So like talking about how low cost and then like listing them on the menu can really help, move not only through product that you might already have, but also have like also have, it's just another way to like make a little bit of money and increase
Yeah,
your GP for sure.
absolutely. That's always a good way. Start with money. But it doesn't look like there's any more questions. So thank you so much, Kelsey. I really appreciated this class, and I'm sure some of the people watching do as well. I do want to say something before we get off. If you want to see more distance learning classes like this one, follow Portland Cocktail Week on Facebook. We have new classes on weekdays and an archive of our past classes in the video tab. We're also on Instagram at PDXCW. You can find out what's coming up next there. We're posting these videos on YouTube for folks who aren't on Facebook, so you can see them there as well. And we have replays of all our old videos. Please fill out the quiz before Tuesday the 19th at pdxcw.com/seedlip. All righty. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you. Thanks again, Kelsey. This was great.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a real pleasure.
Bye, everyone.